Dear colleagues, dear ECPR community, sehr geehrte Frau Fegebank, zweite Bürgermeisterin der Freien und Hansestadt Hamburg und Senatorin in der Behörde für Wissenschaft, Forschung und Gleichstellung, sehr geehrte Professorin Forst, Vizepräsidentin der Universität Hamburg, meine Damen und Herren, ich bin sehr verehrt, hier an der Universität Hamburg zur Gelegenheit der 12. General Conference des ECPR begrüßen zu dürfen. Die General Conference des ECPR ist ein umfangreiches und komplexes Ereignis, das viel Planung und Vorbereitung erfordert. Dass wir jetzt hier beisammen sind, ist dem bedingungslosen Einsatz verschiedener Personen aus Hamburg zu verdanken. Als erstes würde ich deshalb gerne betonen, wie dankbar wir der Hamburger Team sind, welches verantwortlich ist und war für die Organisation. Ohne seinen Einsatz würde diese Konferenz nicht stattfinden. Im Namen des ECPR möchte ich deshalb aus ganzem Herzen Karl-Uwe Schnapp, Peter Niesen, Andreas von Staden, Nicolas Eckricke, Maren Minut und Christina Gaatz danken. As you might have guessed or even understood, if you were able to get your ears around my attempt to sound somewhat German, I have in the name of ECPR expressed my immense gratitude to the team of local organizers of this 12th ECPR General Conference at the University of Hamburg. This is not a small event, and it is not a self-organizing event. A general conference with close to 2,500 registered participants, with more than 500 panels taking place, is to the contrary quite a complex operation. Some of us are familiar with multi-level governance, multi-level politics. Some of us are familiar with the analysis of complex political systems, but putting together the General Conference brings the very concept of complexity to a completely new level. I have thanked the local organizers and would also like to mention as crucial actors in this multi-level organizing process the events team at ECPR's headquarters in Harbour House in Colchester, an events team that never sleeps, believe me, and the academic conveners Maurizio Carbone and Klaus Götz. Of these two, and Maurizio will forgive me for that, I would like to thank especially Klaus Götz. Klaus has brought the ECPR to Hamburg and has played an active role in the preparation of this conference. Yet he has done much more than that. He organized the 5th General Conference in Potsdam in 2009 and served for 6 years, until the 1st of May 2018, on the executive committee of the ECPR, where he was responsible for the General Conference. 2 years from now, in 2020, ECPR will celebrate its 50th anniversary. And if we write down the history of ECPR and of its events, we will have to devote a solid chapter to the General Conference and describe the crucial role that has been played by our Mr. General Conference, Klaus Götz. So thank you very much for that, Klaus. The General Conference has indeed become a landmark in the annual academic calendar. It is the place to be. At least it appears to be the place to be for everybody, or at least the place where everybody wants to be. We have received for this conference more than 4,000 paper proposals, which shows that there is a great demand for being able to present one's scientific work. And that is exactly what scholarly organizations like the ECPR must do. That is our goal and our mission, providing the platforms for the exchange of ideas, of projects, of data, of research results. We can do that with our joint sessions, our method schools, our publications, and obviously our General Conference. Events like this show, through the variety of topics and approaches that you can find in all the sections and panels and roundtables, that political science in Europe is alive and kicking. And that is important. We need political science. We need political science to be alive and alert, to constantly keep searching for understanding these very tricky mechanisms of power. Political science is and must remain relevant and speak to the big challenges of our society. And that is indeed what we are all doing here in Hamburg. And that is why I wanted to welcome you here to this conference. I wish you an exciting and extremely fruitful General Conference.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Dear Chris, he allowed us to call him Chris because he said, don't even try to pronounce my second name. So I say, dear Chris, dear Professor Forst, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the ECPR, welcome to Hamburg, welcome to the University of Hamburg, and of course, welcome to the General Conference 2018. It was so great just to come here and to walk over the campus and to see all the people with the red bags, now partly conquering probably the city already or walking down to the Alster. It is really fantastic to say hello and to welcome all of you here in Hamburg, and I hope you have had a great time so far, and I hope you will enjoy the days to come here. It is a great honor for us as the city of Hamburg, and I'm a representative of the city of Hamburg, the second mayor. I was just being asked, and you're all political scientists and political researchers, so I can explain it to you what it means, because indeed it's a bit special. Germany is composed of 16 states, and all the states have their own governments, and in the city-states, like in Berlin, in Bremen, and in Hamburg, the ministers are not called ministers, but senators, and the prime ministers are not called prime ministers, but mayors. So in Hamburg, we have a coalition, and we have a first mayor, who is the prime minister, and I'm the second mayor, the deputy prime minister, as the coalition partner. So I think this is quite clear, but quite unusual if you come from abroad, and I know that there are quite a few people who have come over from other European countries and from all the continents. So once again, it's really a great honor for us to have such a big conference and such a prestigious conference here in Hamburg. And really, I hope you will have a great time here. And it's a special moment for me to greet so many international scholars from the discipline I studied myself a few years ago in Freiburg. I don't know whether there are people here from southern Germany and from Freiburg. I really enjoy doing that, and I always thought it was so beneficial to be able to study political science and to do political research in international relations. So once again, welcome to all of you. More than 2,500 scholars, I heard, have registered, and you have come from near and far. Ah, okay. Yeah, that's me. So I just explained it to you who I am. Now you have it like written down with a little academic explanation. So it's great to have such an expertise, and we heard it just from Chris, a great chance for academic discourse, and of course, it's a great potential to network here at Hamburg's largest university, and that's the University of Hamburg. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware that the times for European and global politics are currently challenging. I would even dare to say extremely challenging. Democratic nations in Europe and around the world are facing populist and authoritarian changes. Multilateral governments, institutions have come under stress, not on the regional level only, but also in a global perspective. And even truth is having hard times nowadays. Fake news is no longer unusual. And such an environment of growing political instability demands an academic discourse. And meetings like yours, like the General Conference, have such an invaluable impact. They are an ideal platform for discussions and debates, and we definitely need such a discussion. You all here in this room are dedicated scholars with good political expertise, and I'm confident that together you can analyze the current developments profoundly and help us in politics on all levels to find solution. This year's academic program is manifold, and I just had little talks with some of the scholars already. Extremely interesting, not only for you, but also for me, being in politics on a state level, but also be very interested in politics on a federal, on a European, and on a global level. The plenary lecture, roundtables, and panels cover so many different aspects, and I wish my schedule gave me the chance to return tomorrow. And I'm sure that many new ideas will be exchanged here in Hamburg. Cooperations will be intensified on an international basis. And I don't want to be modest to say that Hamburg is the perfect city to do so. Why? Internationality is one of Hamburg's main assets. For centuries, our town has been known as the gateway to the world, thanks to our port. Today, we have the third largest container handling port in Europe. And in recent decades, Germany's second largest city, that is Hamburg, has also been host to several international political conferences and summits, Europe and China and the OECD. Last year, we even hosted the G20. I'm sure you saw some of the pictures going around the world. I don't want to talk about that anymore in this, in this context, but you see there is a platform for huge interaction on all levels. And of course, a number of scientific symposia in Hamburg is very impressive. Also thanks to special workshops for scientists. And here we really work together between universities, between our University of Hamburg and the city government with our Hamburg Marketing GmbH, where we always try to get huge conferences here to make you the best time you could possibly have. And that's not all. Coming from a port city, we are now growing into a city of science and innovation. We want to be a city of knowledge, a city of science, and that's why we are really in a focus for scholars in the field of political science and consulting. We have the University of Hamburg. We also have the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy, the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, the GIGA, the Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker Center for Science and Peace Research, just to mention a few. Yeah, we have a unique interdisciplinary degree program, our Masters of Peace and Security Study. I just want to mention that we have that from both sides, from researching and from teaching also. And I really hope that with conferences like this, there will be even more a spotlight on all the great activities our universities does. And maybe you will have the chance to be back next year, because the university will be turning 100 years. So we will have a huge party taking place from January until December, because we want the whole city to be part of the growing activities of science in Hamburg, because we do see that this is where the future lies. And in times we are facing challenging times at the moment, we really need and we have to rely on what our scientists do, what results come out of research, and I really hope that all the activities being done here at the conference and being done at the universities, not only here but also in Europe and around the world, will help, will assist us to live in peace and harmony together, and to help to handle the upcoming challenges. And therefore, once again, very warm welcome to all of you in our city. Enjoy today and enjoy the coming days, and have fun. Thank you very much.
How does it work? Okay, we all heard that with the party, huh? For a whole year. Yeah, dear Senator Fegebank, dear Chair of the ECPR, dear Chris, as we might say, dear keynote speaker, Professor Forst, and dear members of the ECPR, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our university, and let me also say that we really feel honored to have you all here, and we take it as an appreciation and affirmation to have been chosen as the venue for such an esteemed conference. And on behalf of the Presidential Board, I would like to express our sincere gratitude towards all those who have worked, I guess, tirelessly. We already heard that, to organize this conference, and especially, of course, our local organizing team. As you might know, and Senator Fegebank also mentioned it, our university does not have yet a history over many centuries. Next year we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of its foundation. So compared to other European universities, you might call us a youngster. That's okay for us, but we worked hard and we have striven to establish our position among the leading universities of Germany by focusing on excellent research. Now especially we are well known for climate research and earth system science, for nanosciences, particle and astrophysics, and manuscript research. Innovating and cooperating for a sustainable future is our overall umbrella concept. And like your association, the European Consortium for Political Research, we at Universität Hamburg take seriously what might be called our societal vector. So while research must be free and untethered per se, as an institution born by society, we are called upon to address the grand challenges of our society, or our society faces. So to do so, we must recursively intertwine what we think theory and practice, science and society, rigor and relevance. And of course, science and society will continue to approach grand challenges on different levels, that's for sure. So the use of different frames of references, that is, scientific approaches and their confrontation with the practical topography, that is society, help to identify anomalies and contradictions. And we believe that only thus can we raise awareness for non-intentional side effects of certain incentives and certain actions and provide heuristics for coping strategies. Science and society. We have to be clear about which parts of the path to a sustainable future travel along together, and where each of us will go their own way when multiple destinations, multiple goals are pursued. So what we hope is that this conference venue inspires you to develop rigor and relevant maps that provide orientation in a complex territory. And as we already have seen, you already conquered our city, so maybe you already navigate with some maps through our city. We wish you all an inspiring and inspired journey at this conference, and with good food for thoughts and good food for nourishment. And I'm really looking forward now to our keynote speaker to hear about that inspiring topic. Thanks a lot.
As you know, the ECPR awards several prizes, annual prizes, biannual prizes. The Hedley Bull Prize in International Relations is awarded annually by the ECPR for a book which makes a substantial and original contribution to theory and/or empirical studies in any field of international relations. For the 2018 Hedley Bull Prize, the jury was composed of Maurizio Carbone, chair, Mary Farrell, Manuela Moschella, Bryony Jones, Sandra Pagoda, and Peter Niesen. The jury has decided to award the 2018 Hedley Bull Prize in International Relations to Simon Curtis of the University of East Anglia for his book Global Cities and Global Order, published by Oxford University Press 2016. In Simon Curtis's book, he states that the re-emergence of the city from the long shadow of the state in the late 20th century was facilitated by the state itself. The unprecedented size and scale of today's global cities and megacities owe their conditions of possibility to a fundamental shift in the character of political order at the level of international system. This book argues that we must understand the rise of the global city as part of a wider process of the transformation of international political order and of the character of international society. Global cities are an inscription of the ideals of a market society in space, constructed and defended at the level of international society. They embody the ascendance of a set of liberal principles at a certain moment in history, a moment related to the hegemonic status of leading states in the second half of the 20th century, and the ability of those states to shape international norms. But the evolution of these urban forms has also reflected a tendency for deregulated markets to generate inequality and polarizations. These features are also inscribed in spaces of global cities. Global cities focus and amplify the tensions and contradictions within the contemporary international system and become key strategic sites for struggles over social justice and the character of political life in the 21st century. Drawing on different strands of academic literature, notably urban studies, political geography, and international relations, this book represents a long overdue contribution on the crucial role of cities in the contemporary global political order, and it provides new avenues for further research on the link between cities and states in contemporary global governance. And for all these good reasons, the 2018 Hedley Bull Prize in International Relations goes to Simon Curtis. The EPS Prize is awarded annually for the best article appearing in the previous year's volume of the ECPR's professional journal, European Political Science, EPS. The prize is given to an article that makes a substantial contribution to the field of political science, especially articles that contribute to the understanding of new and innovative trends in political science or to innovative approaches to teaching and learning in the profession. For the 2017 EPS Prize, the jury was composed of Drew de Dalerup, Gianfranco Pasquino, and Helen Drake. They have decided to give the EPS Prize to Christopher Pallas and Charity Butcher, both from Kennesaw State University, for their article entitled Using Dating, not data, using dating as an analogy to teach IR theory. Christopher Pallas and Charity Butcher had noticed how instructors often struggled to teach complex IR theories to their students. With this in mind, they devised a dating scenario analogy, challenging students to explain and theorize a fictional couple's behavior in a way that could be transferred to an IR analysis of state behavior. To begin with, students are invited to speculate why Matt and Mindy ended their relationship. They then work in small groups to suggest various causes for the breakup, and write the answers on a whiteboard in unlabeled categories. Each group is then challenged to defend their answers, which they often do by postulating ideas about human nature or social interaction. These ideas are assigned by the instructor to one of 4 IR theory categories: realism, liberalism, neo-Marxism, and constructivism, linking the students' ideas about human nature with the assumptions of each theory. In working through the exercise, students gain an intuitive understanding of core international relations theories that facilitate their subsequent learning. According to the jury, this is an innovative and novel way to encourage political science studies to think about and to engage with IR theory. They liked the presentation of the method in a recipe style so that people can actually apply it. The discussion is still fulfilling high standards, and the experience of dating is somewhat universal, so that students from different gendered, social and ethnic backgrounds can relate to it. And for all these good reasons, the 2017 EPS Prize goes to Christopher Pallas and Charity Butcher.
Hello, good evening. My name is Mary Farrell and I'm Vice Chair of ECPR and also Chair of the Publications Subcommittee. I'm here to tell you about our new publication, the online journal PRX, which you'll find on the back of the program. We heard from the second mayor, Katrin Fegebank, that this is Hamburg, a city of science and innovation. I think this is very well known, and it's not just a new identity for Hamburg, but something that's been around for a very long time. And Hamburg has indeed set the trends in terms of technology and in terms of science and so on. And I think it's very appropriate that we should launch the new journal here in Hamburg, the city of science and innovation, and to launch it here at the General Conference. I just want to say a very few words about the journal. We've launched the journal this week. It's a peer-reviewed open access journal, gold open access, and it has been produced by ECPR for the members in association with Routledge, Taylor and Francis. So if you have a chance tomorrow or before the conference ends, before you leave, to go across the road, to cross there to the tent, the publisher's tent, then you maybe will have the opportunity to meet the publishers and to sort of find out a little bit more about it. Also, the editors of the journal, Alexandra Segerberg and Simone Guerra, are around in various places at the conference, so they will be very happy to talk to you, tell you a bit more about it. So where we're at the present time, the editors are in place, obviously. We have a team of associate editors and an advisory board. Now, this is all the traditional side of the design of the journal, which you will be familiar with, the editors, the associate editors, that sort of structure. But in all other respects, the journal is very different. So in terms of the structure and operational features, these very much reflect the latest and best in open access publishing. So what can you expect from this new journal? What you can expect is speed of publishing, widespread dissemination of your research, and all of this in a quality journal that we intend will reflect the very best in political science research. So that's the journal. Now, the journal has taken some time in the planning, and it has been discussed at the executive committee over the past 3 years. That's been a very constructive and fruitful process, I think, because it has meant that some time was taken in terms of the development of this product, and with apologies for using this very commercial term. I would like to thank the members of the Executive Committee, past and present, who took part in these discussions around the development of the journal and helped to make it into what we are now launching. I would also like to thank Taylor and Francis, the publisher, who have played a very constructive and supportive role in bringing the journal to fruition and have contributed very much to shaping the technical infrastructure. I would particularly like to thank the editors, Alex Segerberg and Simone Guerra, for agreeing to take on this new venture. New ventures are great, they're exciting, they're wonderful, but there's always that little bit of risk. Now, this is good because, of course, risk can be motivating and encouraging and so on, and an added dynamic. So, but I am confident that we have an excellent team of editors and an excellent team of associate editors, and I have every confidence in them, in their enthusiasm and in their, what they're bringing to sort of getting this journal on the road. And finally, I would urge you to take a look at the journal, to recommend it to your friends and to your students, and to consider submitting to your research to the journal. So that's what it looks like, and I hope that you will support it. Thank you.
Let me welcome you for the local organizers to Hamburg's Audimax. It has a proud history, prefiguring the 1968 student movement already in 1967. It is the birthplace of its famous slogan, Unter den Talaren, der Muff von 1000 Jahren, roughly translated, beneath the gowns, 1,000 years stench. Gown wearing in Germany never recovered. It is a great distinction for our department to be hosting such an important conference, and we are humbled by the huge, record-breaking participation. Hamburg's political science department is small but pugnacious, with its 8 professors and junior professors and 20 more research associates, specializing in comparative and area studies and international political theory. Tonight, and for the first time, it is a political theorist who will give the ECPR plenary lecture. What is a political theorist? A distinguished colleague was once asked at a party. He famously answered, you clarify a few concepts, you make a few distinctions, it's a living. I think that the true message of this anecdote relayed by Adam Swift is that political theory is hard to pin down and comes in a number of varieties, many of which have been welcome at the ECPR for a long time and now form one backbone of its disciplines in its 5 standing groups and in a handful of further sections at this conference. But the fact that theory takes center stage tonight attests to the ways in which it relates to the other sub-disciplines of political science. In this moment of prolonged crisis, other sub-disciplines seem no longer averse to thinking about and formulating the normative questions that political theory has for a long time posed and tried to clarify. We all make claims to critical relevance or contribute to what we should do in a time of crisis. One function, therefore, I think, of political theory can be to try and keep the other subdisciplines honest when unavoidably making evaluative claims, sometimes setting the agenda, sometimes acting as underlaborer. It's a living. This is where tonight's distinguished plenary lecture from Rainer Forst comes in. Rainer Forst is perhaps the preeminent European theorist working today. His work was rewarded with a Leibniz Prize by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, its most elusive honor. Inside and outside the research cluster he co-directs at Frankfurt, Formation of Normative Orders, Rainer has facilitated more cooperation between political theory and its neighboring disciplines than could have been envisaged only a decade ago. I cannot begin to do justice to his list of publications, but want to say that he started out in '94 with Contexts of Justice, the definitive book on the debate between liberals and communitarians, working out a distinctively Kantian position. His book on toleration in conflict, I think it's the largest tome ever published in the Cambridge Ideas in Context series, showed his exhaustive command of the history of European ideas. In recent years, he has developed his own approach as a variant of critical theory in books such as Justification and Critique and Normativity and Power, situating himself vis-à-vis the Frankfurt tradition and its earlier and contemporary key figures, but bravely sticking to his Kantian guns in introducing notions like nominal power. Part and parcel of his approach is and always has been the notion of justification. But more recently, his work on justification has taken on a distinctively descriptivist turn, or at least accentuated the empirical dynamics of justifications in conflict. This research program has a lot to offer, even to the most hard-nosed of empiricists in the various branches of political science. Tonight's plenary is entitled Normativity and Reality, Thinking Politically About Politics.
Drinks first. And by the way, between now and drinks for you, there's only me. So I try to speed up. Dear Mayor Fegebank, dear Vice President Forst, dear Chairman De Schauer, dear Peter, dear distinguished prize winners, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the ECPR, especially the Executive Committee, the academic conveners, and the local organizers. Oh. Thanks. Sorry. Thanking you for the great honor bestowed on me, having been invited to present the plenary lecture this year. It's a great pleasure and delight to be here. The ECPR is a great institution and a major force in forming a European community of scholars with a strong voice in the international chorus of those who have something to say about our societies, their political dynamics and problems. And the program you have put together for this year is truly admirable. The greatest delight for me tonight, of course, is to be honored by you, dear Peter. Thank you so much with such a beautiful introduction. It was, in fact, so beautiful that I feel I should shut up immediately, for after this praise, it can only go downhill. If I may add another personal note before I start, I would like to dedicate this lecture to a common friend of ours, Professor Glenn Newey, who taught at Leiden University before he died in a tragic accident last year. He was one of the great political theorists of our generation, with the sharpest mind, most brilliant wit, and sense of humor. We all miss him enormously, and me especially, for he would have disagreed with basically everything I will say from here on, and what fun it would have been to start another round of our endless debates. As you were all so kind to come to this lecture on a warm evening here in Hamburg, I thought I would try and invite you along on a short intellectual journey. It's a short intellectual journey, but it covers a lot of ground, so be prepared. A journey pursuing a question that might be of interest to many of us, namely, what exactly we are doing when we do political science. Political science is an unusual kind of science. It has one of the longest traditions of all sciences, but it constantly struggles with that tradition. One of the reasons for this is that we have become suspicious of the ethnocentrism within that tradition. Another reason is that the oldest and still most important work in Western political thought, Plato's Republic, contains a paradox that still haunts us. Plato argues that the central question of those who seek the truth about politics, as we do, is that of the nature of the just and good political order. And he believes that there is only one right answer to that question, an answer based on a metaphysical idea of the good. However, that idea of the good, although it is generally valid for everyone and binding, is not accessible to everyone. In the famous parable of the cave, Plato explains that those who have left the realm of the shadows that are falsely regarded as reality, fake reality, we would say today, and have ascended the path leading to the recognition of the true reality of the good, will never be able to return to the cave to explain what they saw, since no one would be able to understand what they are talking about. In fact, those who have grasped the true reality of the good of politics will be killed when they re-enter the cave, as was Socrates. The paradox is that the real truth about politics is politically uncommunicable given the realities of social life. So Plato leaves us with a complicated heritage, a confusion as to what kind of reality our science is going to explore. The reality of the cave and its infinite power struggles, or the real truth of the ideal political order that we all should strive for. This tradition leads to a lot of conceptual problems and rifts. If you think, for example, about the ways in which the term realism is understood. For some, realism refers to the cave reality of self-interested rivalry and the normative arbitrariness of social life. For others, mostly philosophers, I admit, it refers to the view that certain values, including those guiding political life, are true and real. In my view, the Platonic paradox, and it was just I think every grander lecture has to start with Plato, so that's why. In my view, so I made something up about, what could I say about Plato? But there is a point here, I think. The Platonic paradox of the political incommunicability of political truths creates a severe methodological problem within our discipline. The problem goes deep, and it ultimately raises the question of whether political science is a normative or an empirical scientific enterprise. What is our question? To understand and analyze the political orders we live in, or to search for the good and just political order? Now, most of you will say, both, of course, and try and muddle through somehow with some kind of assumed combination between political philosophy and empirical social science. Many of our colleagues say that the scientific part is the domain of social and political analysis of political behavior and institutional mechanisms, and claim, following Max Weber and others, that the normative part is not really science. Others call that view positivism and emphasize the importance and independence of normative political philosophy, leaving the rest to the cave dwellers of empirical social science, but also leaving them the term science for the most part. As a result, political science is a discipline that allows itself the luxury of a subdiscipline called political theory or political philosophy. I don't distinguish in this talk between the two, that used to define this discipline used to define the enterprise of political science, but in the meantime has given way to a new understanding of what science is about. The question of the right or the just political order is then often translated into an empirical program of what certain collectives actually recognize as a legitimate, a just, or a good order, while the original question is seen as being only of historical interest and a matter of possibly post-colonial genealogical critique, or one left for Platonic idealists. as a consequence, political theory and the other areas of political science have lost touch with each other and developed languages of their own. I find that, and Peter alluded to it in his remarks, I find that regrettable, especially at a time of normative crisis, when we are concerned about the future of democracy, the rule of law, or multilateral systems of international cooperation, not to speak of social justice. And when we are in need of appropriate conceptual and normative tools to determine, for example, at which point populism transforms democracy into its opposite, into authoritarianism. Mayor Fegebank already alluded to this issue. Can our voices as political scientists still carry weight in the upheavals of our time if empirical and normative analysis rarely meet? Isn't this a time when there's an urgent need to combine the two perspectives, and when we have to resist the arbitrariness of definitions of democracy that use that term for exclusionary and oppressive forms of politics? Now, in my remarks tonight, I take up this challenge and make a suggestion as to how to bridge the seeming abyss between the language of normative political theory and the language of empirical analysis. What is often missing, in my view, are mediating terms that enable us both to analyze political orders and their dynamics descriptively, and at the same time to develop normative reflections along the same conceptual lines of analysis as the descriptive work. The mediating term I have in mind, and what I want to talk about tonight, and that won't come as a surprise to some of you, is the concept of justification. Now, you might think that this is a typical move by a political philosopher bewitched by Plato, because the realm of justification is basically the realm of values, norms, principles that might be required for normative reflection, but is of little use when it comes to understanding real cave-life political dynamics of interests, power struggles, institutional mechanisms, past dependencies, and so on. But I want to say that this fear is unfounded, for I want to argue for a particular way of understanding the reality of interests, of power, of historical situatedness. In my view, the real reality of politics, of the cave as well as of a perspective free, or better, partially free from the cave, is a reality of justifications. Whenever we enter the realm of politics, whether practically or as scientists, we enter a realm of justifications. We learn to think politically and socially, understanding and using justifications about the foundations and the frameworks of our common life. We accept, often unreflexively, criticize, and occasionally, then reflexively, reject them, including some larger comprehensive narratives about our political life. There is no politics outside the realm of justifications. Every single political thought rests on assumptions about how our collective life is and ought to be ordered. And when we think about the is of democracy, whether our common life is ordered in a good or less good way, we use and we reproduce justifications all the time. Note that in speaking about justifications in this way, I'm not speaking of good justifications from some normative, reflexive, or even Platonic viewpoint. By justifications in an empirical and descriptive sense, I understand what makes people effectively think in certain ways and view reality in a certain light. My thesis, in short, for a start, is that we do not understand political reality if we do not have access to and the conceptual tools to analyze the multiple and often contradictory justifications that constitute political reality as a reality of thought and action. We also do not understand how power works. Let me explain briefly why power. In political science, one of the basic concepts is that of power. Without power, there is no collective normative order. So let's start with a sober definition of that term, close to that of Robert Dahl, who suggested that A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would otherwise not do. Note that B here is an agent who does something that A wants him to do. B is not a mere object, like a stone that I kick away, but is an agent with some freedom of action. So the exercise of power over B requires A to steer B's actions in such a way that they are still the actions of B, but that they now follow the lines intended by A. If B is an agent, the secret of power is to affect his or her agency internally. In other words, A has to give B a motivating reason to act in a particular way. We can express this by reformulating Dahl's definition of power just a little bit to say that power is the capacity of A, and this can be an individual or a group, to motivate B to think or do something that B would otherwise not have thought or done. Power on this definition is normatively neutral. It's neither good nor bad, it's just what it is. For we need not take a stance, as many of our colleagues do, at this definitional level on whether what A motivates B to think or do is in B's interest or not, or whether it is well justified or not. This is why, contrary to Stephen Lukes, who I admire a lot, but contrary to him, I do not think that the concept of power is essentially contested. At a later point, when we fill out more particular conceptions of the exercise of power in a normative way, then contestedness comes in, but not at this definitional level. Note that according to this definition, the real site of the resources for and the exercise of power is the cognitive realm, the realm of justifications. Since A needs to be able to affect and change the realm of motivational reasons for B. Thus, we define power as such that to have and exercise power means being able to influence, use, determine, occupy, or even seal off the space of reasons for others. That power comes in degrees and can be analyzed along a spectrum of intensity. The analysis is still normatively neutral because the means that A uses to influence or colonize the realm of reasons or justifications for B can be a good lecture, a sermon, sometimes closely related, an ideological world description, a lie, a threat, an order, or an act of seduction. Those who convince us as teachers or experts exercise power over us, and those who deceive us or who threaten us, credibly, do so too. But all power, whether negative or positive, is, as I put it, noumenal in nature. That is, it takes place in the realm of reasons and justifications, the nous, our cognitive framework. A credible threat, say, with someone holding a gun to me, gives me a reason to act in a particular way, if the threat is credible, as does an ideology. To be the subject of power means that the justifications that make you think or act in a certain way are determined in relevant ways by others. If the determining in question is unintentional, I call that a mere effect of power. If it is intentional, then I call it an exercise of power. Again, I use the terms reason or justification in a purely descriptive sense. I will later say something about good justifications and how they can be produced. But here it is important that we remain at a descriptive level. We fail to understand how power is exercised, either individually, collectively, or within structures, if we do not understand the justifications that guide people's actions as those who have and those who are subject to power. We also do not understand power shifts, and we live in a time of enormous power shifts, or what it means to lose or acquire power if we do not understand the justificatory dynamics in the noumenal realm. If noumenal is too bothersome for you, just think of something of the mind. In the noumenal realm, the social realm of reasons, these reasons are for the most part not reflected upon or critically tested, but they are nevertheless effective. They are reasons that work. Based on such an analysis, we can distinguish more concrete forms of the exercise of power. Rule, Herrschaft, and among us it is a little unfortunate that Weber's term Herrschaft had been translated as domination. And it's better to keep the two apart because Herrschaft is not a negative term for Weber. There are negative forms of Herrschaft, but Herrschaft is not a negative term and shouldn't be translated as domination. Rule is a form of the regular exercise of power within structured relations based on certain understandings of legitimacy that support such structures, whatever these notions of legitimacy are based on, God's will, the will of the people, or other things. Domination exists where asymmetrical social and political relations backed by hegemonic justifications, hegemonic, you hear rightly, Gramsci, prevail that limit the space of justification either through ideological force or threats of violence or other means. Political domination exists in two dimensions, that of being ruled by unjustifiable norms and, as a higher order form of domination, that of the lack of spheres and institutions of justification to discursively question dominant norms and construct new ones. Violence, and I leave out other notions like force, oppression, and so on. Violence is an extreme form of the denial of justificatory standing to others, who are thereby reduced to physical objects to be moved or destroyed. Such acts, of course, are often meant mostly to have noumenal effects of intimidation, deterrence, and so on. But with respect to those who are the direct objects of physical force and violence, the use of violence may be a reflection of A actually having lost social power over them, because A no longer tries to move others internally as agents, but reduces them into objects. Think of the kidnapper, the famous Tatort cases, who kills his victim, but unfortunately not only Tatort cases, these cases happen all the time, who kills his victim because the victim is not complying, or those who were supposed to pay the ransom refuse to do so, which means that the kidnapper's power, as originally intended, has faded away. And violence is basically a reflection of having lost the power that originally was intended to perform or bring about a certain result. In more political terms, think of the moments at which the tanks in the street lose their power because people overcome their fear or are willing to take the risk of opposing them. Their physical power, the physical power of these tanks, is the same as before. But because of a shift in the realm of justifications, of what people think they ought to do and what will probably happen, because of a shift in that realm, the social power of a tank can be reduced. That is a risky game. They can still shoot. And we just remembered Prague in 1968, and we know that quite often in these situations, tanks start to shoot. But sometimes they don't, because the order to shoot is no longer accepted. And there are too many in the street that you would have to kill if you start to shoot. That's a difficult moment. Physical power, the number of tanks is not decisive in explaining what happens and why. It's all in the realm of justifications and what happens there that explains what happens here. Thinking politically about politics then requires that we as political scientists find ways to analyze and understand the justificatory dynamics that give rise to normative orders, that stabilize or destabilize political orders. I speak of normative orders, here in this case of a political nature, as orders of justification, since they are based on, produce, and reproduce justifications for social and political structures and relations. Normative orders in modern societies rest on complex narratives of justification that support existing power structures and enable individuals or groups to exercise power within such structures, that is, to use their nominal capital as a power resource. My analysis of power does not suggest that those who hold power can autonomously create a comprehensive social space of reasons for others, what Foucault called a dispositif. Rather, those who have power can use the space of reasons in a society in a particular way. Narratives of justification develop historically over long periods of time and form a space of reasons that provides the justificatory resources or the nominal capital for sustaining, changing, or rejecting particular normative orders. Power struggles are struggles to position oneself and one's group within such a social realm in a particular way and to influence the space of reasons for others. This is true for the nationalist who constructs a xenophobic narrative and for the revolutionary who rejects a dominant ideology. If we want to understand power dynamics within certain normative orders, we need to understand the narratives of justification that dominant groups use and weave together, not just dominant groups, all groups positioned within a social situation. Think, for example, of the many strands of discourse within a Trumpian universe, ranging from a Protestant work ethic to racist discourses about who rightly owns the country, giving the term democracy an exclusionary meaning. There are so many layers, historical, religious, economic, that you need to reconstruct if you want to understand what it means to live in a universe like that. Populists can only be successful if they manage to craft such narratives, combining different normative and historically situated sources and stories into a powerful way of looking at the world, what is wrong with it, and especially how to fix it. Such narratives of justification combine national history, often religious ideas, economic reflection, social structure, and they create social and political reality. Occasionally, that looks like a dark cave reality. Think of Plato's cave, as when a certain ideology restricts the realm of justifications, of what's thinkable and what can be said. But such realities can also be opened up by critique, as occurs in a liberation struggle. Understanding political reality requires us to find ways to reconstruct dominant social narratives and their rivals. Only then can we understand why, for example, the concept of democracy, when placed in the justificatory realm of different societies with different historical experiences, that concept for some has the ring of liberation and for some has the ring of colonization. So if you ask them, are you for or against democracy? That's not the right question. You have to understand what they hear when they hear the word democracy. Now, some of you might say, okay, but such narratives surely can be reduced to social interests. Interests are the basic data of analysis for a political scientist. I'm not sure they are. For if we look at how interests get formed, defined, we eventually find, well, what do we find? Justifications. We can understand neither individual nor collective interests if we do not understand the strong evaluations, to use Charles Taylor's term, that lie at their basis. Some might be of religious origin, some guided by beliefs in security, welfare, and so on. There is no basic, raw empirical fact that determines what interests people have and pursue. We are justificatory beings all the way down, and our interests depend on what we consider. They track what we consider important and justified. Now you might say, but surely such justifications are often rationalizations. They are fabricated. But I think this is true, but it's not because we don't see a justification for what we want and have an interest in, but often we see that the justification is publicly dubious. And so we form a larger narrative of justification about what we want, but we do know what we want and why. If we stick to narrow definitions of self-interest as determining people's behavior, we will never understand religious motives for political action. And we will not understand why people support parties which have programs that are not, if realized, in the interest of those who support them. That's because we don't understand what their interest is as perceived by them. And that we can only understand if we understand the narratives of justification that run through them. Now, to shift gears a little, and you see I'm speeding up because I know drinks are waiting. If we're that far in our analysis of politics as a realm of justifications, we might as well ask a normative question and approach the normative now as part of our science carefully, realistically, as many of my friends would remind me. I was in a great session this afternoon where we discussed this. If a realistic conception of social life needs to be sensitive to and analyze the justificatory resources that ground political reality, we can also develop a realistic normative perspective from within the cave and maybe make a few steps beyond it. As I said, no normative order can exist if it isn't supported by certain justifications. That is a social scientific thesis I hold, an explanatory one. These justifications have to be structurally reflected and reproduce, regardless of whether the order is a theocracy or a democracy or something else. Following Bernard Williams, we can say that the first political question, that of securing a political order of security, stability, and cooperation, the Hobbesian question, is a question of justification, such that there is, as Williams called it, a basic legitimation demand that requires the political order to, as he says, quote, offer a justification of its power to each subject, end of quote. Williams draws various conclusions from this, some weak, namely that basic political justification entails that those who are subject to rule must be offered good reasons why that is not a form of mere domination, but the reasons must not be equal and treat all as equals in the weak reading. But there is a stronger reading, namely when Williams argues that a purely self-serving justification cannot count as a justification. Quote, power itself does not justify, end of quote. Now that is a normative, not a descriptive statement, since, as I said, power justifies itself all the time, and it produces justifications about why it is legitimate. What Williams does here is turn the notion of justification into a normative notion, adding criteria for a good political justification. And that leads him to a version of what he calls the critical theory principle that you see up here, modeled after Habermas's discourse theory, which states that the acceptance of a justification does not count if the acceptance itself is produced by the coercive power which is supposedly being justified. I think this is a beautiful principle. I think it's true. And I think more than Williams, who called it a principle of political morality, and I leave that aside, what distinguishes political morality from moral morality, and I don't think he had a very good answer to this. I think this is a principle of reason. I introduced the term reason here since we're among scientists, and reason is the faculty that we use whenever we do something in science. Reason is the faculty of, guess what? Justification. Reason is the faculty we use when we distinguish a better from a worse justification, truth from falsity. The normative criteria of good justifications, whether in science, in politics, or in art, are rational criteria. We do not find such criteria in a Platonic superworld of real values, but by reconstructing the criteria of validity immanent in a validity claim we make. So if the validity claim of a political norm is that it is binding on everyone, valid for everyone, it must be justifiable to everyone reciprocally and generally, because that's the validity claim implicit in a political norm. And if that's true, we might as well go one step further. Now you need your safety belts, but you can hold on to these not so well-crafted slides. I apologize, but I hope they help a little. We can go over to a stronger normative program, because the reflection on criteria of justification, of good political justification, opens up the possibility for a stronger program. It is stronger because it operates with heavy normative vocabulary, which, however, is not grounded in a Platonic view, but in a version of constructivism, however, of Kantian constructivism, to warn you a little of the normative argument that follows. Kantian constructivism is just a reflection of what it means to consider ourselves as constructive normative agents. We make the norms that bind us and others. But the procedure and the criteria for making them are not innocent. They have to conform to rational criteria. As beings who use our faculty of reason to produce, to test, accept, or reject justifications, we face the task of constructing a common world of norms that are binding on and justifiable to all, subject to them. As agents of construction, we ought to, that's the normative argument, regard ourselves as equal authorities of the norms that bind us all equally. And as such authorities, we respect each other's right to justification. The criteria of justification that hold between us as reasonable and responsible beings, responsible in the sense that we respond to each other with justifications. The criteria of justification do not predetermine the content of our constructions, but they predetermine the respect for each other as equal constructive agents and the procedure of construction as a form of public justification when it comes to publicly acceptable and justifiable norms. As normative authorities, then, we are, in classical Kantian language, lawmakers and law takers at the same time. But now you might object, wait a minute. How did we get here from being lured into a descriptive justificatory program, then had this small realist bit, critical theory came out of the hat, a funny term like reason, and now we're here in a strong normative program? What trick was used here? For surely, you might say, we never are normative authorities in our normative orders, not to speak of equal normative authorities. And surely we never will be. Now that may be true, but if you agree with me that it is a serious deficiency, a real deficiency, I think we should say, of a political order that it does not respect its members as normative authorities who co-determine that order, then you will also agree with me that we, as political beings, have to regard ourselves as being owed recognition of our status as normative agents and normative equals. And if we make such a claim that we're being owed such a recognition, we implicitly say that that's what we really are. So the Hegelian theory of recognition, which says you're only an equal after recognition is granted, is wrong. Because you have to know that you're an equal precisely when the recognition is not granted to you. That's why you start the struggle for recognition, because you think that's what you're being owed. You think you're a normative equal. And that's where political dynamics, if there ever are emancipatory political dynamics, and we would hope there are, that's where it starts, with that claim. It's not a claim to have something to eat. That may be true too. Or to have a place to sleep, or a work, or some public recognition. But it's a claim to be someone who is not overruled and ignored as a normative agent, as an authority in the normative order you are subject to. If you think such claims are justified, you think that such normative equals you really are, and others too. And then you also think that the claim of human rights, or the core claims of human rights, are justified because these rights are owed to normative equals, even though they are not, and maybe they will never be, normative equals in a legal and political sense. So here the thought that I started from of two different realities comes back, but I don't think in a paradoxical, rather, as you could see this coming since I'm a Frankfurter, in a dialectical way. Political science is a methodologically grounded reflection on who and what we are as political beings. And it reveals to us that we're always members of different worlds. The world of real and effective justifications that we have absorbed, that occupy us, but also the world of at least the possibility of asking for and constructing better justifications among us, if we recognize that this is what we are, normative constructive agents. The world of better justifications is not the true world of Platonic ideals, but it is the world in which we use a faculty of critique, of recognition of the other, and engage in a practice of producing better justifications for the social and political frameworks we live in. No actuality, as dark as it may seem, can eliminate that possibility completely for us. Based on the notions of normative authority and the right to justification, which says that no one must be subject to norms that cannot be properly justified to him or her, other normative notions fall into place. The liberties that we claim are justified, which reflect the kind of freedom we have as equal normative authorities in the political and legal realm, and we keep constantly fighting for those liberties. The liberties that cannot be rejected among normative equals. Equality means that from a moral point of view, we are equals, and that we have a basic claim to have a secure and equal standing as non-dominated legal, political, and social subjects. Remember, domination means being subject to a normative order without proper justification and without proper procedures and institutions of justification in place. Therefore, non-domination, and this is a different version of non-domination from the Republican ones that many of you favor. It's a discourse theoretical notion of non-domination or of domination. Non-domination in a legal, political, and social sense means having the rights that are required to be secure from such forms of domination, having opportunities to change the normative order one is subject to within adequate structures of collective justifications. And that is why democracy, last sentence here, does not simply represent one value among others. Rather, it appears as the political practice of justice, as the institutionalization of a form of non-arbitrary political rule that reflects our standing as equal normative authorities. Such a normative notion of democracy is surely a regulative notion that can only be attained in piecemeal fashion, but it is not based on an ideal form of the perfect democracy, because we don't know how that looks like. Rather, democracy progresses practically by transforming relations of domination into relations of justification, overcoming domination by establishing the powers of justification among those who are subject to a normative order. That's how democracy progresses. It aims to establish what I call a basic structure of justification that secures our standing as non-dominated equals. That can be a national or a transnational structure. That depends on the kinds of domination you are subject to. So we don't ask the question, is the best form of politics a national or a federalist or a global one? We look at the forms of power that are actually exercised over us, and we ask what it means to transform such forms of power, if they are forms of domination, into forms of justification, of overcoming domination. Political philosophy doesn't start with the question of the best political order in a vacuum. It starts with the kinds of domination we are subject to, and then it asks a strongly normative question. How do we become normative authorities within these structures? Maybe we can never, but the normative question is the same question, but it's not asked in a void. It's not asked abstractly. Such a notion of democracy as the practice of justice, and I call that justice as justification, enables us to avoid confusing democracy with the domination of minorities by majorities. There is no such thing as illiberal or authoritarian democracy, just as there is no such thing as a democracy that produces severe social injustice. For all of these defects point to and create structures of exclusion that are unjustifiable among normative equals. Such deficiencies transform rule into domination, and domination is incompatible with the term democracy. And since we're that far already, I might as well add a few closing words about critical theory, apologizing, but not really, for having a Frankfurter speak to you here and not being able to avoid that term. What I hope to have shown is how the choice of a useful mediating term between descriptive analysis of the power dynamics within a society and a normative analysis of what the justified claims of us as members as normative orders are. I hoped that the right mediating term shows a way to connect descriptive and normative analysis. The link between the descriptive and the normative requires a shift of understanding in such a way that we recognize that we cannot simply observe the justificatory games we are part of from a view from nowhere. We are no mere observers there, for several reasons. For one, we cannot understand these justificatory complexes and narratives if we do not become, at least to a certain extent, participants in these games. So as scientists, we have to be part of these games and also gain a methodologically reflected distance towards them. We don't describe them from from outside. If we understand them, we will also be driven, and it's unavoidable, to take a reflexive stance, a stance of evaluation and critical distance. then we not only ask what the dominant narratives of justification are to which we are subject and how they are reproduced, we're also asked whether they're really justified, knowing that in any enterprise of justification, we are finite and fallible beings who can go wrong, factually and normatively. But the faculty we call reason is the faculty to always ask for better justifications. Science is based on us using that faculty in the right way, and political science needs to focus on the institutional frameworks that produce and reproduce or prevent justifications. The synthesis of an empirical and a normative perspective on ourselves as justificatory beings and as members of normative orders that I have in mind is a program of critical theory. Such a program I call a critique of relations of justification, and it involves a number of aspects. A scientific analysis of social and political relations of rule and or domination that inquires into the structures of justification that reproduce such normative orders. How are justifications produced here? What are the main sources of justificatory power, ranging from institutions of the public sphere, the media, churches possibly, other sources, family structures, to economic and cultural power complexes, to institutionalized forms of decision-making and agenda setting. We do not understand what happens in political institutions and how they work and are formed and reformed if we don't see the larger social setting in which these institutions gain a meaning and a justificatory purpose. Second, we need a discourse theoretical and genealogical reconstruction of the justification narratives that dominate a given space of reasons. How did these narratives come about? How did they develop? What do they block out? What do they allow for to thematize? And what are their possibly ideological? I'll say something about the term ideology in a minute when I end. What are their possibly ideological functions? We need methodological tools, third, to criticize existing justifications of social and political relations. Are they based on proper empirical grounds? What are their normative premises, implications, and potential exclusions? Again, empirical and normative analysis have to go together. Fourth, given that a basic structure of justification is a demand of fundamental justice, our theory must inquire into the possibilities and forces of establishing such a structure given certain past dependencies and the reality of rule and or domination exercised within as well as beyond states. Fifth, such a theory, notoriously you would say, must be able to account for its own normativity. That is part of what science asks us to do. We have to give a methodological account of the normative standards we are using to distinguish better from worse justifications. Ideally, critical theory uses the principle of rational critique itself as the basis for its own arguments. For example, it does not use a reified or ethnocentric notion of false consciousness or true interests when it comes to define ideology. Rather, it calls those justifications ideological that lend reciprocally and generally unjustifiable social relations the appearance of justifiability. That's what ideologies do. You don't need a grand theory of true interests for such a term to be used. Now, finally, I conclude. I did not want to say that every serious social science should aim at such a synthesis of empirical and normative research in a critical spirit, as this program here was just an example of how, by using the mediating term of justification, we can unite descriptive and normative perspectives. There are other ways to do it, but if we do it in a good way, then the normative and the empirical no longer look like the view of the cave versus that of the moral good. Rather, using that mediating term enables us to see how the empirical and the normative are connected. By using the principle and the right of justification as normative foundations that are both immanent to practice and transcend them, because justification is the stuff of social life, but it's also the possibility of transcending given forms of social life. I get clear signs here that drinks are the issue for the moment. By using that as our normative framework, we need not be fixed on stale distinctions between ideal and non-ideal or realistic theory. We do gain the critical distance towards social and political reality that every scientific enterprise requires. Science enables us to model reality in such a way that we can rationally understand reality and orient ourselves within it. That is as true of social science as it is of natural science. All we need are the right methodological tools. Understanding and evaluating our political world as one of justifications is a way to make good on that promise. Politics is a power struggle. Of course it is. But then it is also a struggle for justification, a struggle for the dominance of some justifications and a struggle against them becoming dominant. In these power dynamics, the question of justification is often used strategically to construct a false reality, a reality of caves. In such a rage against reality, real news get called fake news. Indigenous migrants become enemies of the people, economic exploitation becomes invisible, and so on. This leads to what I call crises of justification, meaning not only that we are in danger of losing sight of the criteria for proper justifications, but also that institutions for reflecting on and producing legitimate collective justifications are in danger of becoming eroded and disappearing once people forget what their purpose and ground was. In such times of crisis, we do not need Platonic sages, but we do need critical theories that uphold the one quest that in social and political life must never rest, the quest for better, for real, for reciprocal and general justifications. That we have the right to demand such justifications is as important an insight as are the many ways of uncovering how that right is denied through the fabrication of false realities. The critique of such false realities is as much a task of social science today as it was in Socrates' time, perhaps even more so. So Plato had a point. Do not cling to your caves. Thanks for your attention.